It's now been some time since the attacks in Paris took place, and we now have more information on the incident. Apparently now we do know that some of the terrorists who got in, some of the ISIS people, which is it's believed to be ISIS, came in as refugees. One of them came in through Greece. And of course this has spawned a whole huge wave of anti-refugee sentiment, as if refugees are somehow responsible for this. I think what's something to keep in mind here is that despite the fact some of them came in as refugees, some of them were French citizens. Some of them were born in France. Some of them were born in other European countries. So if it's the refugees' fault for the ISIS members getting in, what does that say about the fact that they were born in France? If it's somehow Syria's fault that the terrorists got in, what does that say about France? What does that say about other European countries? It should be kept in mind that these refugees are trying to get away from places where ISIS is carrying out these attacks. And not just ISIS, but Western powers, particularly Libya and Syria, where France has a hand in causing this devastation. And that the money that funds ISIS and the training that's given to them and also other sections of the FSA are coming from the United States. These refugees are a direct result of Western imperialist actions. Then, when there's a retaliation against them for it, groups that are funded directly by them come into their country and cause this devastation. They have the gall to blame the refugees. This is complete and utter nonsense. There's one more point that I would like to make about those who came into France to carry out these attacks. It doesn't actually take refugees to have this happen, to create a porous border for them to come in. Remember, those who carried out 9/11 and the British 7/7 had all the necessary paperwork and documents to get into the country to do everything that they did. And they went right past US and British checkpoints. It didn't require any kind of refugee status at all. That was done completely through paperwork, all through official channels. A big part of third worldist theory is understanding that the advanced countries or the first world countries tend towards fascism in a time of crisis, not revolution. And I believe that we are seeing that in France right now. Yes, we saw the footage where the anti-fascist protesters attacked the fascist protesters who were spreading anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-refugee, etc. But I think something more important to keep in mind here is that a publication, El Figaro, showed that 67% of French people are willing to accept and would support non-elected technocratic officials to run the government, which means essentially unelected people. Who they use the word technocrat, but really what they mean is a fascist dictatorship. 67% of the country is willing to accept that. Not just willing to accept it, also willing to overtly support it. That says a lot, and it says a lot more than a small demonstration being shut down by anti-fascist people. And I'm sure there are anti-fascist people inside of France. The masses of the French people are definitely turning towards fascism, and you can count on that happening. Now, when incidences like this take place, people are very quick to remind France of their colonial history and their more recent actions in Malawi, Syria, and Libya, and that the death counts, the death tolls are far higher than anything that has taken place in France in the last 100 years. Now, while this is absolutely true and something that should be brought up, I think it's incomplete. What's important is not that there are bigger body counts somewhere else, but the relationships between those two body counts. The fact that France is a tremendous beneficiary of the greater body counts that occur in the third world. Just saying that there are more people that have died is not enough. What's enough is to show how France is responsible for them and how the average French person benefits from them, while they have no sympathy for the extremely larger numbers that die. They're suddenly crying over infinitely smaller numbers of their own, showing that power dynamic and the relationship between those two body counts is what's important, and that's what should be kept in mind. And one final point I wanted to make is that there's a lot of people running around saying this is not the time to politicize these deaths, and that would be inappropriate. I would like to remind these people that these deaths were political in nature. The acts of ISIS or whichever group was responsible for it were political acts. Their acts were in response to political acts made by others. ISIS gets its money, its funding, its training from the United States. The United States did so as a political act to try to destabilize the political governments of other countries. All of this occurs in a political context. So to stand there and say, this is not political, this is the wrong time to make it political, is tantamount to saying, don't think about what has happened at all. These deaths are the results of political acts, and that it is important to keep that in mind when thinking about these. Is it politicizing when Francois Hollande comes on and he says, we will retaliate and we will be merciless? What he's really saying is, we are going to continue the pattern of imperialist violence that they have already carried out, and they intend to do more of it. Is this not a political act itself? This whole thing is in a political context, a lot of it being a power dynamic between the first and the third world, the global rich and the global poor. There is a difference between the suffering of these people in the first world and the suffering of millions in the third world. This is all in a political and economic context. To deny this, as I said, is nothing short of telling people not to think about what happened. And whenever we have instances like this, it has always been mindless nationalism, mindless sorrow, and mindless pray for the victims and denounce everybody who carries out violence and show sympathy for every victim, even though we already know that perpetrators of violence and victims are not equal, and they exist in a tremendous different power dynamic. Those who attack out of self-defense are not the same as those who attack in aggression. People who are defending themselves are not the same as the attackers. And that's what the media or what the bourgeoisie really want people to forget here, is that there is a power dynamic with this violence. The violence of the oppressed against their attackers is not the same thing as the violence of the oppressors themselves. So understand that this is in a political context, and one we absolutely should not forget. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of them, then head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you can go to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media.